Hey everybody, welcome to this next clip of Phoenix Tonight Presents an Evening with Ann Moses here at Jarrod's Coffee, Tea and Gallery in downtown Mesa. And we just finished talking about the intense years of the Monkees between 1966 and, well, for them it was 1970. You stayed at Tiger Beat for 2 more years. Mm-hmm. And then after that, what was next for you personally or professionally? How do you come out of the real heyday of that groovy pop music? What was next?
Well, certainly right after the Monkees, then it was straight into Bobby Sherman and...
Oh, of course.
You know, I mean, the timing, and it was Screen Gems, and whether they strategically timed it, I don't know, but it was like, you know, right as the Monkees were being canceled, Here Come the Brides was being introduced, and, you know, Bobby Sherman was the new fave, and great guy. And so he, instead of going out to, although I've been out to the Columbia Ranch because much of Head was filmed out there, and whenever the Monkees would do outdoor things that weren't the beach, it would be at Columbia Ranch.
Sure.
And that's where Here Come the Brides was filmed. They created the 1880s Seattle, seaport, and the Lumberjacks.
Sure.
Which was the story of Here Come the Brides. And so my trips were out there a lot of the time, and that was great fun. Then just about the time Here Come the Brides was being canceled, then the Partridge Family.
Wow.
Came in, and that they were the new, you know, David Cassidy was the new teen idol, and you know, I'm telling you, being seen on TV every week, that was the ticket. I mean, it was certainly an easier road to music success than some of these groups that would work long and hard to be seen by audiences and you know, hope for a hit record. But
and what's interesting about the Monkees, now that you say that, is they started on television. That was the origin of the group, is to play a band, whereas other musicians that had started playing in clubs, and that was the aspiration, is to get on TV. So it's interesting that they were reverse engineered in that way. And you mentioned the Partridge Family and stuff, very similar in that way, right?
Yeah, cool. Very much so.
I have a David Cassidy comic book at home.
Something I don't have.
So then that was the early 70s.
Right. So I left Tiger Beat in 1972, and I'm going to save the why for my book, which will be out in the memoir will be out in spring of next year.
Okay. And let's say right now, if people want to find that now and in the future, as this video will be watched forever, they can visit your Facebook fan page.
Right.
Ann Moses.
Ann Moses.
Ann Moses.
Facebook / Ann Moses, and then my blog, where I've written a lot of pieces about back in the day, is annmoses.com.
Annmoses.com.
So it's easy.
And when we met and were talking, you seemed surprised that people wanted to hear these stories. Is that right?
Well, I was bowled over when I found out there were people that cared about those days, because occasionally, as I would travel around the country with my husband, his job took us to many different cities because he was in TV news, and we would make new friends, and at some point during our friendship, you know, they would say, "What did you do before you're doing what you're doing now?" And I'd say, "Oh, you know, back in the day, I was a magazine editor, you know, a teenage magazine editor." And they'd ask me a couple of stories, but they didn't necessarily care about the Monkees or the Partridge Family. And then it would be like, "Oh, you should write a book." You know, and that's as far as it would go.
Sure.
But when I had moved down here to Arizona, which was 9 years ago, and I was with a group of co-workers, and most of them were in their 20s, and so they somehow they had found out that I, you know, used to hang out with the stars.
Sure.
The only problem was they didn't know who most of those stars were. They recognized Elvis. I would take in my book of photographs because I had prints of all the people I had my picture taken with, and then go, well, who's that and who's that, and oh, it was this big group that was on TV, and
Sure.
oh, this is, and
We didn't even talk about Elvis. You met Elvis.
another show.
Okay. You
Another
hear that?
show.
You heard that? Right here, another show, the promise of another show. Okay.
So, but they would want to hear about the stories, and I would tell them. And at that point in time, they said, "You've got to write a book. You've got to write about this stuff." Well, for the very first time, while I was telling the stories, some of them were distracted with their phones, but what they were doing is that they were Googling me on their phones, and they go, "You're on 60 pages. You have 60 pages," and I'm going, "What?" And I mean, I knew about Google. My husband's a computer programmer. He was an early internet person. I couldn't handle it until it stopped being dial-up. But, I just didn't have the time.
Sure.
And here were things where my name was mentioned in other people's blog posts or on other sources. I mean, and one they came upon said, when I was 12 years old, I wanted to be Ann Moses. She hung out with she hung out with Davy Jones, and, she had pretty hair and wore really groovy clothes. And I'm going, what the heck? This is just, I mean, who would have guessed?
Well, I think a lot of us aren't surprised by the intrigue, the interest, how absolutely amazing those times were, and how you've contributed to our knowledge of those times in Tiger Beat and beyond.
Well, it wasn't until that day that I realized that had happened.
Ah, wow.
And so then when someone said, you should write a book, I actually started to write the book. And as it turned out, that little girl that wrote that when she was 12 years old, she wanted to be me, she is a book editor. So I enlisted her help in being my editor for the book. And we have collaborated for the last 4 years.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And she's become one of my closest friends. And I mean, just serendipity.
Absolutely.
It's so incredible.
That's amazing. So this book is scheduled to come out spring of 2017.
Correct.
You're self-publishing to start,
Yes.
and after that as far as distribution, you'll be distributing it, like I said, through your Facebook and blog.
Well, right. I mean, we'll be on Amazon for ebooks and paperbacks.
I have one of your Tiger Beat competitors here, 16 magazine. There's look what they did to Mickey. Tiger Beat didn't pull these pre-Photoshop shenanigans on their covers. Look at that.
We didn't do a lot of cartoons.
Cartoons. You're like cartoon journalism. But at that time, there were a few things kids could read. Now, you mentioned Google, of course. There's an endless amount of coverage. You're having that. You're having celebrities surprised that you want to talk to them. Back in the day, now a celebrity can't get off an airplane without being hounded by a crew of cameras. What do you think about that? Just the way this grassroots stuff has evolved into such a cornerstone in our culture and society.
Well, I think the desire was there on the part of the audience to know everything they could. I mean, the notes that I get on Facebook are, I went down to my drugstore on the day that it published every month and I saved my allowance, or I took my babysitting money, or I do errands for my mom and she'd give me the 25 cents to buy Tiger Beat. And they were dying for that news. Now it's just now you're bombarded with it.
Sure.
For the fans, I think it's awesome. I mean, do they tell you too much information? I don't know. Probably, if you were a fan back in the day, there was no such thing as too much information.
Sure.
So.
And a scandal was really, look how long Mickey's hair grew over the summer.
Well, and I mean, it was just not proper in those days to put in things that weren't a 10-year-old wasn't able to read, number one.
Sure.
You know, if I'm quoting somebody and they use profanity, I'm not going to put that in Tiger Beat.
Right.
You know, it might be in my book.
Nice.
but it just wasn't appropriate, and that's not what 10-year-olds were looking for. That's not what 12-year-olds and 14, 16-year-olds, you know, they were dreaming of what's it like to kiss Davy Jones, and not, you know, who are the 9 women he's sleeping with on tour, or which didn't happen.
Of course,
with Davy,
sure.
But you know, it wasn't that same. As far as I know, let's put it that way.
Of course.
Okay? So it just, it was just supply and demand. We were supplying what the fans were demanding. And, you know, I mean, we didn't take pictures of David Cassidy was a chain smoker. And we just wouldn't take pictures of that. But what we would do is we would put David quits in 40-inch type, and the story was actually about how he's quitting smoking. Sure. But, you know, the headline that sells the magazine is, you know, David quits. Whoa. Right. And of course, in that story, we ran a picture of him smoking. Sure. And it said he's been working real hard, he's quitting, and, you know, isn't this great? Wow. That really does harken back to a totally different time. It was, you know, the whole scene in general was much more naive. You know, the rock groups weren't doing heroin on tour. You know, they might smoke pot, but they weren't into these, you know, they weren't doing meth, they weren't doing heroin, they weren't addicted to anything other than maybe cigarettes. Sure. And so it was just a more innocent time all around. In simpler terms, what you're saying is that the pioneers of rock and roll music were really about the rock and roll music. They weren't necessarily interested in building a scene and appearing glamorous or rebellious, or they didn't want to be worshipped by their fans. They wanted the music to be the thing. So. I think that's what precipitated most of it. It was it coming from, you know, what they wanted to be. Now, David Cassidy, he wanted to be a famous actor, and part of his struggles through the years were he was a teen idol, not a respected actor. But, you know, I would say with most of the groups of the time, it was about the music. Sure. And the live performances, and they loved it. Wow, that's fantastic. And it was great to be in the audience. It really was. Well, Ann, I have to say to conclude our show that thanks to your career and the book that you'll be putting out next year, you've made us, for generations, feel like we were in the audience, feel like we were there with the band. You took these people we still idolize, you humanized them, and by being a human yourself among them, you've become one of my idols. And I really appreciate you being here on this. That's nice of you to say. Well, thank you for being here. It's very nice of you to take this time. I appreciate it. It's awesome. AnnMoses.com is the website. Ann Moses is her fan page on Facebook as well. A very special thanks to my friend Bob Leeper, who is helping me record this episode for you to watch. Ann's husband Tony, who helped with the audio to make sure we can get as much of this captured in the loud sounds of Jarrod's Coffee, Tea and Gallery, who I'd also like to thank for hosting this. Downtown Mesa, the Cappuccino. For more Phoenix Tonight episodes, watch this YouTube channel, and we'll catch you next time. My name is Russ. Thank you for watching, and thank you everybody for coming. Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Ann Moses.